Hello, I'm Mr. McBrien. This is TEJ20, Turing 7, Arrays. Okay, so yesterday we talked about displaying pictures and we talked about working with other kinds of files. Today we're going to talk about something that's complementary to that idea of retrieving values from files. We're going to talk about saving a list of values in a variable array. And we're going to try to get an understanding of when we should use arrays and when we should use files for contents. Alright, in both cases, whether we're talking about containing things inside a text file or an array, we're talking about lists. So we looked at accessing the contents of files in a big list that's contained inside one, for example, txt file. Many applications use a series of values. Instead of in an external file, they'll use them inside the program. And mainly, you'll do this if you don't need to access those values outside the application. And then we can use an array to do this. So what is an array? Essentially, an array is a variable that has the same name for a whole series of different positions. So the actual identity of the value is denoted by the variable name plus the position. And we do a declaration of an array simply saying that there's an array name and then there's a number of positions available. For example, we could say we have an array name and we have 0 to 499, meaning that there are 500 different positions that are possible. So yes, we have these different variables that are available to us. We can refer to them, we can declare them in one line, and we can refer to them using things like loops. And these can be very convenient, of course. So we can work with these arrays using the same kinds of commands we use for an individual variable. And anytime we want a specific value, we can explicitly write the number in place, like in this case, where we're taking the number 1 position, the thing in the second position. Remember, because we allowed 0 in our system, so when we first declared it, we allowed 0 as a possibility. Okay, so really what we're going to do today is we're going to jump straight from that to showing some applications, because I don't think this is particularly difficult in terms of a concept to understand how to implement. I think it's more important for us to understand how we use it. So what I'd like you to do is to go back to your dice roll utility that you used previously. And I want to make some changes to that dice roll utility. So in this case, we're going to still use the auto roll, use the loop to roll a die 500 times, much like we did previously. But previously we just collected the total of the rolls. This time, I want you to record the value of each die roll to an array position. And we can do this now. And we can do it pretty easily by using our array command and take the roll that we get from our random number generator and assign it to a position. And then what I'd like you to do, and this will illustrate a great deal of the value of arrays, I think, is ask the user which roll he or she wants to know about. In other words, ask the user to give you a roll number and you will output the value that was obtained in your experiment. So yeah, you can retrieve the die roll from the user's input and then tell the user the value for this roll. Okay, so if you had Probably you've already thought about the idea of you could have written all of these results of the rolls into a file, into a TXT file. If you'd done this, how would you have implemented it? Think about how you would have achieved this retrieve command. And I think you'll start to understand some of the value of arrays from that point of view. Okay, so let's jump straight to activity 2 then. Hopefully you've already implemented your array system. Now I'd like you to consider a second activity. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like we are implementing a great big program. We're going to pretend that we're implementing an online translator that takes a word in one language and retrieves a value translation of that. So what I'd like you to do is create 2 arrays. An array of English words and an array of words in some other language. Many of you are bilingual already. Almost all of us have some acuity in other languages. But if you don't, go ahead and just do some online research very quickly, because I'm not proposing we create a dictionary. Just do at least 5 words. So what you're going to do is create 2 arrays, and in compatible positions put English words in their translations. And this can stand in for a English-French dictionary, for example. What I'd like you to do is implement the capacity to have the user input a word, match the word to a position in your array, and output the translation. Now obviously you're going to constrain your user only to the 5 words that you have in your database. But this is fine. Obviously, if you were going to implement something much larger, you would go ahead and implement a check system where it checks to make sure the word the user has put in is appropriate and things like this. But for your purposes, you can just write down the words that you have translations for, and while you're doing testing, just be sure to input a word that matches the one of the words that's already in your dictionary. But go ahead and implement this, and I think it should be able to illustrate some more benefits of this kind of approach. Now, at the same time, that approach has some fairly significant limitations. And you may come across these as you work, but I will point out one, and that is, let's imagine you've got a compiled program. How do you go ahead and add word number 6 to your dictionary, to your translator? So maybe think about how you might improve this this tool. Okay, go ahead and implement that code and have some fun. It should give you some interesting ideas of how these things can be used. Okay, welcome back. Now, now that you've implemented 2 array-based systems and a few text-based systems or file-based systems, I'd invite you to think about, do you have a good feel for which one you would use for a given problem? Well, I'll try to spell some things out, and to a certain extent, these are style-based questions. For many applications, you could use an external file or an array to contain a given list. But what will happen is, for given applications, there will be a more logical choice generally. And as you get more experience with coding, you'll start to get a good feel for which ones are which. Here are some rules of thumb that might help you choose for now. So when you're doing files, when you would want to use files would be typically when you need external access to your results from your program. So, for example, if you wanted to take your results into Excel, you might use files when you need to update your given lists for your application, and you don't want to type them in using your own utility to update the lists. So if we take our example of our dictionary, of our translator, we might want to be able to update it without having to type them directly in. You would use files when your application needs to be customized for different users, so that you can change the experience for a different user without having to recompile your software. You might use files when you intend to review the entire contents of a list as part of your workflow within your software. And finally, you might use files when you want your application to have memory. So you want it to remember the results of the work that was done in session 1 when the user is doing work in session 2. Hopefully that helps to clear some things out. Now, when to use arrays. Arrays can be efficient when you don't have to update the starting values for given variables very regularly. When you don't need access to the results outside the application, so you won't be taking the results into Excel. Now this one is interesting. Arrays can be useful when you're doing cherry picking. So when your application doesn't need to review every single value that's produced, but rather needs to pick a value from the list, from a position in the list. For example, retrieve the 167th item on the list. Then it can be effective to use an array. And finally, arrays are useful when you don't have multi-session workflows. That is, you shut down the application and you can let it forget about everything that's been done. Okay, so to summarize, arrays can allow us to create workflows that involve lists of values, much like file-based workflows. They can dramatically reduce the amount of code that must be done to work with large numbers of values. They're complementary to those files that contain lists. The implementations can often be very similar, but typically the workflows are slightly different, mainly involving memory, software memory. Okay, so for your homework, please do those 2 applications. Please upload them with proper commenting. So you've got the die roller and the translator. Upload those to Classroom so that I can review them. Thanks very much. Have a great day.